I suppose first of all, I want to ask you about the sound. I'm still new to the sound of your band, but I suppose from a novice's point, it sounds remarkably like. There's a quote actually from Kurt Cobain. He said that Nirvana sounded like Black Sabbath molesting the Beatles. And not to be disrespectful, is sort of how what the sound of your band reminds me of.
Really?
In a way, because
I've never heard that.
I mean, I can see it.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, our sound has changed a little bit with every release. So I don't know how much of our work you've heard, but the two most recent singles that were really, that were put out in October of this year, definitely are a little bit of a departure from even the stuff we released earlier this year.
I was actually going to ask, because I think the first record of yours that I heard, which came out in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, had much more of a, I would say maybe punk vibe. Songs were faster, things of that, like that. What has changed? I mean, not just the tempo, but lyrics-wise, it seems to have been something of a transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short answer is that life in America, and we also live in Tennessee, so we live in the middle of America, has been pretty intense for the last 4 years. So we made the record that you're talking about, Dave, in at the very end of 2015, and it was released in early 2016, and life just felt different. And then as this presidential administration has been in place over time, and other factors, I think my sensibilities have just gotten heavier and in response. And I do listen to heavy music, and I grew up listening to heavy music, so that's not new for me. I've made heavy music before, but I just think it's actually been a heavy time, and there have been heavy issues to address. So somehow our band moved into that space sort of organically.
Yeah, and I think, we actually sat on that record for a while. We didn't put it out for almost a year, or at least the songs. The songs have been around for a long time. And Garfield, an EP that we put out, actually came out before that did. And it makes sense if you listen to that. It's a lot heavier and a lot more intense, a lot angrier. It's a darker subject matter. And it's still very like up tempo, but there's kind of the beginning of us playing like slower, heavier music on there also.
Yeah.
I should actually ask, because I've often had this debate with musician friends who say that playing slower, heavier music is in fact more difficult than playing the faster stuff.
It can be, yeah, and the sound has to be just right too. I think, like, because we're a two-person band, playing the heavier, slower stuff live has been a challenge. Getting my guitar sounds to really fill the space and not sound too thin. If there were 5 of us, it wouldn't be as big of a deal, but because it's just 2 of us, we have had to make some sonic adjustments as we've changed as songwriters.
Yeah, and Dave's kind of the beginning of that, actually, because we had a bass player until 2016, 15?
I don't know, 15.
Yeah, so Buick's rig was born of necessity because we ended up being the only 2 people on stage. And so it's become this massive, iconic, to me, very iconic, instantly recognizable sound. But it would never have happened if we'd still had a bass player, likely.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I should actually ask you, more of a geeky question, but how do you get it to sound so full? Because on record, especially, it doesn't sound like a 2-piece. It definitely sounds. It isn't missing anything. Let me put it that way.
Well, I should say that Jerry actually plays bass on the records. So there is a bass on the records, but live, we've had many people say that they don't miss anything when they see us live. So I'm playing through a 1993 Fender Blues Deluxe amp, and then also the same signal is being split to a Mesa Bass 400 that's going through a 215 Sun Cab, which is handling a lot of the low end, even though I'm not playing through an octave pedal or anything like that. It just that those frequencies are being amplified through that rig, and the treble and the bite and the teeth is all happening through the little Fender amp. Those Fender amps are loud too, and they break up really easily. And then I'm playing through a series of pedals. I primarily play through a Big Muff bass Pi fuzz pedal, turned all the way up. Every knob is turned all the way to the right. I love that pedal. I'm a fan of pedals in general. I'm building pedals right now, but
Oh, wow.
but those amps do a good job of balancing like the bite of the sound, but then also filling out the low end for sure.
Right. I guess that the Big Muff pedal in many ways is sort of the standard, stonerish, fuzzy guitar tone, or it accounts for it. But if I'm not mistaken, I understand that you're from Nashville, which is obviously famous as a songwriter's town. How does that influence your work? And I guess if I'm not being impolite, how do people here react to it? Since I would imagine it's still predominantly country based.
It is. I'm actually not from here. I'm from Miami, Florida, which is a whole other cultural thing. But I've been here for 12 years, and Jerry is from here, and we are definitely doing something different in the larger scheme of what Nashville offers. There is a quite a variety of music here, but yeah, I think people sort of get what we do here, and I try, I really do write songs, even though we're a very heavy band. My songs still have pretty traditional forms. I think you'll find, there are verses and choruses and bridges and outros and hooks and things. There just happens to be very loud, heavy music about intense subject matter. But Jerry's actually part of the other side.
Yeah, well, to expand upon what she said before we detour, I do personally feel that it's a thing that sets us apart, that she writes in such classic song form, because she writes everything. We've co-written maybe 2 songs in the band across the history of the band. And I'm like, what if we did this one push here, or did this a little longer? But otherwise, the songs are pretty much all there when she brings them to me. But yeah, like the classic song form and singing with a big clear voice, which you don't hear all that common in heavy music anymore. And so to me, it makes it kind of my favorite thing, because I grew up in this songwriter town. And I will say the local scene here has always been predominantly rock music of some sort. It wasn't until recently that it became more of an Americana songwriter town as far as the live music scene is concerned. And most of that was just from what people were expecting to get when they moved here, because so many people started moving here from out of town.
In the last 8-9 years, truly.
Yeah, and so it has sort of an unfortunately kitschy element to it. But growing up, it was always just a rock town. A lot of the musicians working here in the session scene and producers were in rock bands at one point that didn't work out, so they gave up and started producing or just playing other people's records. I was born into that. I'm 3rd generation, so I've been doing session work since I was 11 and just moved out of the house doing it. And so this is like, this is my real passion project, is kind of taking everything I've learned over my life and putting it into her songs as a player and like bandmate.
And I also write with and for other people for their projects. So this is my output personally, but I do write in all kinds of genres with other people for whatever they're doing.
Could I ask you more about that? It's actually very interesting to me, because it seems that songwriting, at least in the rock world, it's not as respected maybe, or the skills needed to do that well aren't as well defined as they were before. But it seems that Nashville, at least the image you get from when you're from Europe, it looks like a songwriter's city, and there are all those stories about songwriting sessions. And is it still functional in that way? Are people still going to Nashville to chase songwriters' dreams? Let's say.
Yes, it's still a huge songwriting hub, and I think it's very common for people to want to write with other people here. I have found that for my personal output, I like to write on my own. I don't love to co-write for my personal work, but that's also because I'm writing about kind of weird stuff. But but people do spend a lot of time writing with other people here, and I think it's one of the draws. I mean, one of the cool things that Nashville has are these things called songwriter rounds, which they've started having in other places as well, but they're very well known in Nashville, where 4 or 5 songwriters will get together in a circle or on a stage and each play one song down the line and keep going around like that to showcase what songwriting sounds like in its sort of original space, and before it becomes produced and played on. And I think that's a cool thing that Nashville offers. I'm happy to be part of it. As I said, I don't do it for my own work, but I am always honored to be asked to write for other people's work, for sure.
That's very interesting. And I actually wanted to ask you about, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I apologize, was Stone Child the latest single?
Yes.
I wanted to ask about, I read a bit about it, but I wanted to ask you about the subject matter.
Sure. You want me to just speak to it a little bit in general?
If you'd like, sure.
Sure. I wrote Stone Child not that long ago, just in August of this year, about a story that I'd learned about from a friend of mine who lives in Washington State on the Port Madison Indian Reservation. She's a Suquamish tribal member, and Stone Child Chief Stick was a member of her pretty immediate community. She actually teaches some of his children. He was killed last year by white police officers at an Independence Day celebration. And he was shot in front of many, many community members, including children. And it was unjust, and it was very likely informed by racial prejudices and racial tensions. He was Chippewa Cree, but he was part of the Suquamish community. And earlier this year, it was determined that the police officer would not face any accountability for that shooting. And then later in the year, about a year after Stone Child was killed, another elected port commissioner vandalized Stone Child's memorial site and had a big racist rant about it while he did it, while police were picking him up.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's been a lot of racial tension in that area. And I just felt, I sort of just heard the song and let it come through, but I felt like it was important to bring that story to a larger group of people, both in and outside of America. It's amazing that we're speaking with you about it because it was such a concentrated local issue that really didn't make it out of the town that it happened within. I would never have known about it if I didn't have a friend connected to the story. But I did ask permission from the family to release the song and to promote it in the way that we have and to tell this man's story. We would never have told it without their blessing. And we did also invite a member of the Suquamish community to speak on the song, and that's what you hear when there's a spoken section in the middle. She's speaking in Lushootseed and addressing really white colonizers in general about coming to this continent and becoming oppressors to Native American people. So it's been an intense and heavy release because it's a real story about a real person who lived and died, who left multiple children behind and family members behind, and the community is not seeing any justice for it. So yeah, it has felt like a lot of responsibility to tell that story, and I have been really grateful to the Suquamish community members and to Stone Child's family for letting me tell it.
And of course, it naturally feels different seeing what's going on in the US, especially in politics, seeing it from Europe. But one of the things I noticed, and I was actually talking to someone about this, is that even though obviously the US is so famous for protest music in the 60s and being involved with politics, there haven't been so many figures doing that recently, or maybe risking their careers. Does it sort of feel like that from your perspective? I know it's getting a lot of positive feedback, but I would assume it's a risk as well.
I think it is. I think protest, I'm a human rights activist all the time, outside of music contexts as well. There is risk. There's always risk of sort of the more superficial things, like not being liked, not being supported by people who disagree with your approach or your position. But there's also a very real danger for people who speak up. I mean, depending on what you're speaking up about, there are people who see violence as solutions, you know, as who will try to shut down any dissenting voice. So there is also a risk of that involved with speaking up. But I very much believe that it's part of people with privilege, and in this country in particular, people who are white, people who are cisgendered, heterosexual, whatever the qualifiers are. I mean, I think that there's a duty, if you have any platform at all, or even if you don't, to speak up when you see injustice. And, you know, the Native American community, they're not a monolith, but I think it's safe to say, in a general sense, that the Native American community has been treated appallingly in this country, on this continent, for hundreds of years. And I think that there's a pervasive idea among white people that we've sort of addressed it a long time ago and we fixed it and everything's fine now and we're all living in harmony together, when clearly situations like Stone Child are happening, and not only are they common, but they're not even being talked about. You know, I mean, it took a sort of a weirdo in Nashville to write a song about it for a lot more people to have heard this man's name. And I think that speaks to how little we're actually addressing the imbalance in this country.
That's actually very interesting because I mean, for somebody from Europe, many of the issues related to America, you get to hear from representatives or lobbyists, and obviously Native Americans probably have less of that power, at least to spread that message outside of America. So it's very interesting to see somebody representing for them. I actually wanted to ask, and forgive me if I'm mistaken, but you released a few singles this year, if I'm not mistaken. Are these going to be parts of an album, or how? What sort of project is following next?
Well, you know, so we put out an EP, and I think we had never really talked about it, but we were going to follow it up with an LP probably.
Yeah, so an EP came out in April of this year.
We put out an EP in April, and I was actually just thinking about how back in April when everything was shutting down, we were still like, well, how will we tour and stay in people's houses with COVID out there without really fully understanding? Of course, we were all in grief because we were so excited about putting it out, not understanding we won't be able to tour till like next fall maybe.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It might be possible that we compile it all into one thing, the EP and Stone Child, any other singles we may have or might put out before our next like full length. But
I kind of like right now in this uncertain time where we're not able to play in front of audiences, I kind of like releasing these smaller batches of songs together, because Stone Child actually was released with another song called Your Reign Is Over. So it was a 2-song release, and then our April release was 5 songs. And I think that it feels good to be able to keep reaching out and connecting with people who might be listening and not ask too much of them. Everybody has a lot going on.
Sure.
So I feel like, you know, a humble offering of 2 or a few songs feels like we're still here and we are trying to connect with you and share what's important to us without asking you to listen to like 14 songs. The last full-length album we released was called Bill, and it was released in October of 2018. And that was a big old chunk of work. I mean, it's a 13-song record that we made to tape with Steve Albini in Chicago. And I loved making that record like all in one shot like that. I love being in the studio and cramming it all together. But I am finding some relief in this kind of musical interaction where we just have like a more concise message to share every so often. But I do like your point of perhaps putting it all together into a larger release and maybe putting it out as like a limited vinyl or something when we're able to tour again and sell it like that.
Yeah, the thing for me, it's, you know, just as an outsider, the songs on Hold On To Yourself all really fit together. Stone Child and Your Reign Is Over really fit together. They're both definitely the same band, but I don't know, it'd be hard to imagine them like the theme might be thrown off of each release. Because all of her songs are incredibly meaningful. They are. But yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, we'll probably just keep putting out smaller releases until we can travel the world again. Because that seems to be when is the best idea to put out an LP, when you're going to be gone for a while. But until then.
Yeah. Yeah, because also right now we're only releasing digital work just because we're not able to tour and sell merchandise. But I'm really grateful we're able to record ourselves because we've just made these records in our own home studio. And then Kurt Ballou has mixed both of this year's releases up in Salem. So it's Salem, Massachusetts. I'm sorry for anybody who's not in America. Yeah, so I don't know. I kind of like the shorter bursts of songs right now. I feel like nobody has any attention span, including myself.
That is true. For me as well, it's you do get sort of treated to small chunks of information, and you get used to that.
Yeah.
I would actually really want to know, and this is just first of all personal curiosity. You mentioned working with Steve Albini. What's that like? I guess the myth about him is that he has obviously very good taste and a clear vision, but that he stamps that vision on each project that he works on, regardless of the genre he's working on. That he's very fixed in a certain image.
Well, I'd say he has strong opinions on engineering, and his room sounds like what it sounds like. But that's where it stops. He really just captures whatever you bring in. To the point of like how organized you are, how together you are, you're not going to get anything extra out of him as far as like song arrangement or.
He did make suggestions with like harmonies and stuff.
He clearly was enjoying working with us. At least that's how he took it, and he threw out ideas, and that was great. I mean,
I think the most I can say about Steve, as far as what he brings probably to every project, is that he's very process oriented. So he's incredibly organized, and he has a way that he thinks making records works simply from a tracking perspective. And he doesn't insist on it, but he does. I mean, he is an expert, you know, and we come from all kinds of backgrounds. We've made records all kinds of ways in and out of this project. But it was kind of great to go from recording ourselves and having to be really aware of all the mics and all the crap that can happen when you're recording, and just work with somebody who was running the sessions and really was like, today let's just do all the basic tracks all in one shot, you know, instead of splitting it up and remiking. You know, he has a very clear process that works. And, you know, when you're recording to tape and you're working together for a limited number of days, I found it really beneficial. And I personally responded really well to it, but I don't think that he puts any sort of like tonal or other kind of stamp on it. I think he is an expert at documenting exactly what you sound like when you come to work with him. He's not going to make you better or worse, and he's not going to take care of your feelings. It's definitely required for everybody to go in there like knowing who they are and what they make, and Steve will document that. And I think he's the best at what he does, because I've never felt so comfortable in an outside recording situation. I loved working with Steve personally.
Wow, because I guess there's that famous moniker on the albums he works with. It says recorded by Steve Albini. It doesn't actually say produced by him, so that would make sense. But you also mentioned the live scene, I guess, that you depend on that, and that you've come to expect to promote an album in a live setting. The two things I'm really curious about is how does that work practically, and what sort of bands do you end up playing with, because your music is quite distinct?
Thanks. Good.
Yeah, well, you know, we ended up playing with a lot of what you would call stoner, doom, like heavy rock bands after and right before the Bill release. And there was kind of a moment, it was like we opened for Red Fang here in Nashville, and then afterwards we're like, okay, that's it. Because that show went so well. That was a complete accident. We didn't expect that whatsoever. But for the most part, yeah, that's where we go. It seems like the rock genre, as we maybe understand it, which to me is always high gain guitars, high energy singing, you know, rock songs. It's not really what rock is nowadays. So all those bands have ended up just kind of sliding into heavier genres and metal in some form or another. So I kind of think that's what happened to us in a lot of ways. Because it just turned out we're really like a heavy metal leaning rock band with some punk, I guess, in there almost.
Right.
But
and hardcore.
Yeah.
I'm definitely very influenced by hardcore in my particular writing thing, maybe more than punk. But I really grew up loving Bad Brains and some bands that I primarily think of as hardcore bands. But speaking to the first part of the question about promoting rock records in a practical way, I mean, we've been independent the whole time we've been a band, so live shows, I think, have been essential to our really finding listeners and making emotional connections. There's only so much we can do on the computer, and I think we're all doing a great job this year. You know? And I really appreciate this and other opportunities to connect with people in a more intimate way instead of just being like metrics on Spotify, because that again only goes so far. But live music is like a real emotional exchange, both as an audience member for me and as a performer. And I think that that's where people really learn if they love your songs or not. And so, you know, like writing a batch of songs and recording them and having them to promote has been, you know, the live show has been essential to translating the real essence of what that music is. And this year I have really felt the absence of that. We've done a couple of live streams, maybe 4, and we have one coming up in a week. And I'm so grateful to the people that watch, but I do think it's different when we're not all in the room together, you know, and not all able to like shake hands and sell merch or just whatever, just talk at the merch table afterward. That's been a really big part of our vitality as a band. And this year it sort of felt like you've had to just like keep acting as if and like pretending that you're a band. It feels like pretend, honestly. Yeah. I mean, outside of recording itself, everything else has just sort of felt like, you know, pretending that the rest of it is happening until it's able to again.
Well, I think I said it to some friends the other day that we've essentially been broken up, so to speak, because, you know, I
disagree.
Well, no, what I'm saying, there's making a record and then there's touring, and touring is most a year. And so if you're not touring, it's like being sort of broken up. You're just a studio band. And the actual communal part of being in a band is not there anymore.
But I will say I'm really grateful for the privilege of being able to write and record, because a lot of bands don't live together right now and have not been able to even like have one single band practice since February or March of this year. So we have made we've released music since then. So I'm super grateful.
Yeah. I never could have expected to miss touring as much as I did, though. I knew I loved it, and I knew I loved doing it, but exactly how much and like how important it was to me to feel centered.
Yeah.
And I guess my final question, because we kept touching on the touring aspects. Obviously, I know how difficult in a way, but pleasurable as well it is for bands, punk bands and metal bands in Europe to tour, and how much they rely on friends and connections and clubs to be very nice to afford them to do that. I know a little bit about I've read a little bit about the 80s and 90s scenes in punk and metal in the US. I'm wondering if it's the same feeling, the same sort of communal feeling right now or before the pandemic actually, or how that still works from a practical standpoint.
Silence. I would say in a weird way, yes, I do think that the communal aspect is there. I don't think online is for everybody, and I think some people are not connecting. But I've been really surprised by how much farther the music has gotten this year. We thought we would release music and no one would listen to it because we weren't playing shows, because we'd never not played shows around a release before. And we've had more listeners this year online than, I mean, by tens of thousands, than we ever have before, and all over the world. And I think it speaks to what we didn't know before about accessibility or weren't paying attention to, you know, that you know, now we're community members with you all of a sudden, you know, in Europe. And, you know, we've had people watch live streams from Sweden and all kinds of places. And we were never doing live streams before. We were just playing for 50 people in, you know, Muncie, Indiana before, and thinking that that was what connection meant. And now it's like, I think camaraderie has really spread across the globe. And there's something kind of amazing about that. I do miss the other way, but I think when we do get back to live shows, we have to remember this and find ways to also make this possible, you know, to have live streams of the shows while we're playing live in front of an audience so that we can continue the connection. But is that answering your question? I don't know what I mean.
Well, I think talking about camaraderie in like the 80s and 90s, I do think going into this, it was a very saturated scene that had gotten sort of over corporatized and homogenized as far as like, you know, too many venues being owned by the same person all across the country, and sort of
right.
The amount of gatekeepers there were got smaller. The sort of requirements to even get in the door got higher, and there's a chance that could be worse when we come back. But I also think there's a chance that either sort of an alternative scene popping up, which is what happened in the 90s, really, or the whole scene just getting opened up a little more because there's less happening. I know a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford to stay together as bands or be able to stay together, or even do it as soon as it comes back. So I don't know. I'm pretty positive about the future in this way. Live streaming doesn't seem to have been that big of a hit for our genre of music for the most part. Some bands really do great work with it, but it just, like, it's so dependent on energy and actual volume in the room that it doesn't really translate no matter what. So that's a good thing at the end of the day, because people will want to come back and see you when you can do it. But you know, I think the camaraderie is real. Like, we feel it from our friends who've supported this release and reached out and stayed in touch and are keeping going. And I feel optimistic about the future. I think things were getting a little exhausting going into it, and a lot of people were starting to take things for granted. So
Us included.
Yeah, so a reset might end up being a good thing, even though nothing about this disease and shutdown has been a good thing. But, you know.
Yeah, we don't want to silver line it for anybody. We know there's been a lot of loss this year, for sure.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. And to be honest with you, I really hope to one day get the chance, obviously not to just see you in a live setting from the computer, which is brilliant, and it's great that we have that, but also actually get to see you play live and in person. And thank you so much. And you were so kind to do this and to answer my questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making space for us and for inviting us to speak with you. Wonderful.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.